Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gifts, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the morning grind. It is so good to see you. I have been up this morning and working on things and being productive. I feel like I have been so far out of that for the past weeks, it seems like, but I'm trying to get things done over here. How are you doing today? I hope that you have been productive as well. There's a lot going on over here. I've been trying to get the morning messages put together again, but didn't quite get to that. Was about to get to that point this morning, but didn't quite tell you. But didn't quite get to do that to update the video file. So I will just tell you what's going on. First of all, tonight I got to set up the thumbnail for this, but tonight we're going to have a table talk with Brianna and Cameron. Brianna and Cameron are going to be here on the table talk tonight. We're going to be discussing more about the fall and its archetypical story structure. So 7:30 p.m. Central Time tonight. Both of those are very popular guests on the table talk and very popular guests on the channel. So both of them will be here tonight. 7:30 p.m. live. We'll be talking about the fall and getting Cameron's take on that. So please be aware that's going on. I'll put out a notice in the Discord server as well when that's going on. In fact, come to think of the Discord server, I should probably go ahead and drop the link right here. Discord server, Ravenkeep Discord server. That is in there right now. So that's going on. Also, this morning, if you are a channel member, I posted a discount code to ravenkeep.net. So I put a discount code in the YouTube community tab for a members only post that gets you $7.99 off of any mug. So I've got a few mugs left, and I have my cultist coffee mug this morning. So these are the custom mugs that I designed really to go along with the cultists. So, of course, they're based on the Starbucks logo. So we made those up. This is cultist coffee. We've got cultist coffee right here. And then this one right here is also the Witch's Brew logo. And I had a limited number of them made up. And I've been shipping them out personally. They're sitting over there in my bedroom, in the other room. So I've got cultist coffee and I've got Witch's Brew, and then also the Fish Do Not Drink Tea mug. So there are those three. And then also there are a few bags of the coffee left that I have ready. The cultist coffee themselves, both of them are medium roast, the cultist coffee and the Witch's Brew. So if you are a channel member and you would like to get a mug, well, actually the same amount of the channel membership this month, you get immediately off the mug. So if you want to come over here to, I'll show you ravenkeep.net. I guess I should put a link down here. At ravenkeep.net, which is where I keep all of the stuff that we've been making over here. That you can go right here. Fish Do Not Drink Tea mugs, Witch's Brew coffee mug, cultist coffee mug. All of those mugs, the coffee themselves are down here, so you can pick those up. And if you choose to join the channel now, if you're not a channel member, you can join the channel, and then you can go right over there to that post and pick up the discount code, and then come right over here and pick up mugs. I'm not planning. I have a few of these left. I only have, like, says down here with Witch's Brew, like I only have 3 bags of Witch's Brew left. I have a few more than that of these mugs, but I'm not planning on having those reproduced or reprinted once they are out, like the mugs are out, because I have to pack these up myself, because mugs, they will often get I found that the warehouse, if I let the warehouse ship them, that the warehouse wasn't packing them appropriately and they were breaking. So I took charge of all the shipping for the mugs, and so that's why I have been shipping out the mugs personally, if you want one, to make sure that they're packed well and not broken in shipping. But as a result, I'm not going to print them over again. Right? Because I'm trying to get away from the physical side of things, especially something that I have to ship. But I really think they are great mugs. And so if you would like one, you can get them. And then also, if you join the channel, then hey, take the same amount off of a mug. And by the way, if you want board games, I only have 5 boxes of War of Kings left. That is my one of the board games that I designed. I designed War of Kings and Enchantress. We probably should take a look at Enchantress maybe later this week on the Morning Grind. But the only boxes of these that are left in existence are 6 boxes of Enchantress and 5 boxes of War of Kings. So if you want one of those, now would be a good time to pick one of those up, because they are all almost gone, and those will not be reprinted either. And you get $99 if you order for shipping. An order of $99 or more gets free shipping anyway. So now would be a good time to go and do that. All right. Who says fish don't drink tea? Rob does. Fish do not drink tea. That is a line. If you have seen the cultists, that is a line from episode 2 when Mike's mother offers some tea to Rob. We're going to be analyzing some of those numbers tomorrow for our World Building Wednesday. So that is what's going on. So let's see who we got here. James Bacon's here. James is here. Good morning. And Zero the Blade, both of those channel members. Thank you so much for joining us. Zero Theory is here. Thor is also here. Good morning. Micah is up working on the RPG. That's fantastic. I was doing that yesterday. Spent a lot of time on that yesterday, and then got pretty far in it, and then realized this is still not working. Good morning, Brent. And David, good to see you. And Vision is here. Okay, wonderful. Gang's all here today. Okay, so what I thought we would do, been going through my list of topics over here that we still need to cover. I mean, we've been covering a lot of RPGs. You know, one of them actually Amber, diceless role playing. I want to take a look at diceless role playing as well. But I received this dungeon, Kobold's Guide to Dungeon, the Kobold Press Guide to Dungeons. And I thought, well, I've been meaning to take a look at that. I thought that that's the one that we were going to look at when I first started taking a look at the AD&D Guide to Dungeons, but I skipped over it, and I figure, hey, let's go back and do it. It's different from what I was expecting. It's basically essays on dungeon design, but we have had this theme lately going on dungeon design. So we've looked at cyclical dungeon design. We did look at the AD&D Dungeon Builder's Guide briefly. Then we took a deep dive into Jackwang or Jackwissing a dungeon, whichever way that it's actually supposed to be. That was a couple of days ago. So we've looked at dungeon design quite a bit. So I figured, well, now is probably a good time to go ahead and do that as well. And go ahead and figure out what is actually in this Kobold's Guide to Dungeons. Let's see. So let me pull that up. Here it is, the Kobold Guide to Dungeon. So let's see what they have to say on, I believe this is more like the philosophy of dungeon design, different elements of dungeon design. So let's bring this up. So there we are, the Kobold Guide to Dungeons. And I think this was pretty recently released. They did send me this copy complimentary as a PDF. So we'll check it out and we will see what it is like. Okay, let's sip, let's drink or breathe and then sip. So everybody, take just a moment here to breathe and then sip. Focus on your breathing for 20 seconds during the day. 2 deep inhales, complete exhales, and then take a sip of your favorite beverage this morning, whatever beverage it is that you have in hand. All right, let's go. All right, wonderful. Okay, so let's go over here and check out the Kobold Guide to Dungeons. So this is, when I opened this up, I was expecting it to be kind of like a dungeon builder, but this is an essay book. I think that very similar to other essay books that they have done before, and I have not been familiar with these yet. The Kobold Guide to Game Mastering and the Kobold Guide to World Building. I think I almost picked up the Kobold Guide to World Building a couple of times when I was looking for material on world building, but I didn't ever like pull the trigger on it. So maybe that's something that we should do, especially if we like this one, because world building is something that we do here. But the Kobold Guide to Game Mastering, I didn't know they had put that one out. The Kobold Guide to World Building had put up, has gotten some nice reviews here. And then also there's a Kobold Complete Guide to Game Design. And that one is apparently a 2012 ENnie award winner. So, okay, so apparently these books have developed some kind of reputation in the gaming community. I guess here they are: game mastering, game design. There's a Kobold Guide to Board Game Design. I didn't know that. Oh, 2. Okay, so Guide to Magic. Okay, apparently there's a lot of these things. Has anybody read any of these? Is anybody more familiar with the series than I am? And I do recognize some of the names here in this, although I'm sad to say not as many as I probably should. Wolfgang Bauer, of course, I recognize. And of course, I think we should take a look at what essay he wrote, because we were using his theory of world building design to decide what type of materials needed to be in our world building books. Oh, David May says, I'm currently reading the 2nd edition of the Guide to Game Design during downtime at work. Well, let us know if it's good. Stargate Mind says this mimics the Gygax books he did about the same era with Troll Lord Games. The text in the TLG books is not copyright. Troll Lord Games books is not copyright. Yeah, you know, I do remember that there were some books like that, and I never got them. There was a certain, if we're talking about the same series of books, I remember there being some books that came out that was when, like, there was the Like the D20 publishing rush. Was that during that time? I think it was. So we get David Zeb Cook here. Bashir Gauss, he was recommended. I've spoken to, or I've texted with him. I have never spoken to him, but it was recommended that I interview him, but we could never get together on a subject. I forget what subject that was, but we couldn't actually get together on it. Maybe one day we'll be able to have him on a table talk show one evening. But okay, so let's see here. So our introduction. Maybe we should see what's in the introduction, see what this is all about. A book of 5 10-foot poles, more than just a hole in the ground. That one's by Zeb Cook. A dungeon is a story, no empty rooms, emotional storytelling and dungeon design, sound the alarm, ripples, the playground dungeon, Zen and the art of loot distribution, D&D and D&D and D, Once Upon a Dungeon, fancy descriptive words I learned from Gary Gygax. On questionable naps, the rule of 3, where are you going to run, beyond the stairs, dungeons by design, and then about the contributors. Let's start with the introduction and see what this is all about. Stargate Mind says that it's great that the books he was talking about, it's great that you can build an RPG in a week. Okay, let's see. This is by John Joseph Adams. Should we let's go to about the contributors. John Joseph Adams, who is writing this intro, is the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and is the editor of more than 30 anthologies, such as The Wasteland, The Living Dead Epic, Legends of Fantasy, The Way of the Wizard, Operation Arcana, The Lost World, and Mythical Kingdoms. He is also editor and publisher of the Hugo Award-winning magazine Lightspeed and is the publisher of its sister magazines Nightmare and Fantasy. In addition to his short fiction work, he's a producer for Wired's The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast, and for almost 5 years, he was the editor of John Joseph Adams' books novel imprint for Houghton Mifflin's Harcourt, where he edited novels by authors such as Veronica Roth, Hugh Howley, Greg Bear, Carrie Vaughn, Ashok K. Banker, and others. Lately, he's been working as an editor on various tabletop RPG projects for Kobold Press and Monty Cook Games, and is the contributing game designer on books such as Kobold's Press Tomes of Heroes. Okay. I am not familiar with much of that. It's mainly the Kobold Press side of things is what I know about. I guess I am out of so many loops. I'm not I am out of so many loops, as you can probably tell. So, introduction. After nearly 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons, we're all well familiar with the concept of what a dungeon is. At its most basic level, a dungeon is any kind of underground indoor locale that a player, character, or protagonist must traverse in order to complete their quest. They're frequently subterranean in old castles or ruins, or formed by a series of natural or unnatural caverns. But could a haunted mansion be a dungeon? Sure. Could a difficult-to-traverse forest full of nasty thorns and brambles? Why not? Of course, dungeons are very dangerous places filled with monsters and traps and other hazards, but maybe they don't always need to be still. But perhaps they don't always need to be still. But maybe they don't always need to be too still, be compelling. But maybe they don't always need to be to still. Oh, maybe they don't always need to be to still to still be compelling. I don't know why that sentence was odd to me. Okay, in this anthology, you'll find 17 essays exploring various facets of dungeon design, from using all 3 dimensions to where and how to drop loot to pick up your pack, about how to pack your dungeons not only with a gamut of monsters, but a gamut of emotions as well. I asked these writers not to let the default idea of what a dungeon is stand in their way. I wanted to see essays that honor the history of the craft of the dungeon designs that molded us, but also ones that look into the future and explore the limits of what a dungeon can be. So grab your torches, your 10-foot poles, your 50 feet of rope, and your pythons, and let's get delving. Okay, that was a very short introduction. Okay. The book of 5 10-foot poles. Something tells me we should probably start with the first one because that's generally a good place to start with a collection of essays because it probably is the first one in order to set the tone. Then, depending on where we go, how much time we've got, we can take a look from there. But maybe they don't always need to still be compelling. Right, yeah. Okay, so I'm glad that other people saw that too. Or it wasn't just me. Okay, so the book of 5 10-foot poles, observations in dungeon design by Lawrence Schick. So let's go down and figure out who this is. Lawrence Schick has worked on a lot of role-playing games. He also wrote Heroic Worlds in 1991, was one of the first comprehensive guides to tabletop RPGs, but nowadays most books he writes are under the name of Lawrence Ellsworth and in the historical fiction genre. His big ongoing project is editing and translating new modern English editions of all of the Musketeers novels of Alexander Dumas, a series that, when complete, will fill 9 volumes, from The Three Musketeers to The Man in the Iron Mask. The later volumes are still running as serials at Musketeer Cycles, Substack.com. In 2023, Applause Books will publish Cinema of Swords, his guide to movies about swashbucklers such as knights, Vikings, barbarians, and samurai from the silent era to the Princess Bride. Schick Ellsworth's website is swashbucklingadventure.net. See you there. All right. Okay, so this is Observations on Dungeon Designs. Hey, Helsente. Welcome, welcome. Okay, I was an early adopter of OD&D and have been designing dungeons for both tabletop and video games for nearly as long as such dungeons have been designed. I'm still at it, working at the time of this writing as a lead narrative designer for Larano Studios' Baldur's Gate 3, a Dungeons & Dragons video game. Fantasy role-playing games come in flavors for every taste, each with its own approach, but I found that where dungeons are concerned, there are some useful design principles with almost universal application for both tabletop and video games. We're going to take a brief look into 5 of them in this essay under a title that's the tip of the helm to Miyamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings. Yamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings. Poll 1, Boundaries. Dungeons & Dragons, the first commercially available role-playing game, added new concepts to the storyteller's toolbox, some of which have become so pervasive and familiar in the modern media that it almost seems as if they have been around forever. The ideas include a character's health or hit points, defensive armor values, character skill sets grouped together as classes, and the revolutionary idea of character progression or leveling up. Among these influential and now classic concepts must be included the idea of a dungeon, an enclosed, usually underground location consisting of a series of dangerous puzzles or combat areas, spaces that are encountered in a sequence defined by the dungeon's layout. Let's consider why dungeons are so important to role-playing games, and they constitute half of the very title of the game that started it all. This stunning and thrilling promise of role-playing games is that their flexible rules enable the players to make, by collaboration and consensus, choices that simulate any situation the player can imagine, thus bursting the bonds and limitations of classical board and card games. Players use these rules to tell stories about their imagined selves, but stories require structure. And when they do, and when you have the option to literally do everything, the choice has more meaning than no choice has more meaning than any other choice. From a dramatic standpoint, everything is the same as nothing. Thus, in the dungeon, which imposes a simple but rigorous structure on the player's actions. So I guess here we have the idea again about constraints encouraging freedom, strengths encouraging creativity. So here is this kind of thing. The same kind of idea, I suppose, is arriving here. So when you have the option to do literally anything, no choice has more meaning than any other choice. So constraints help you out. Exploring a dungeon gives players purpose. Its easily understood physical limitations give the actions clarity and focus, and almost unlimited variety of space that can be encountered, given the player's broad scope to exercise their character's rule-defined capabilities and the player's own limitless imaginations. In this way, the very concept of an RPG, which has at least in theory abandoned all limitations, immediately offered a return to limits by setting play within a bounded environment that imposed an easy-to-grasp structure. When you make player decisions within a sequential structure, the result is a story. Stargate Mind says, my favorite dungeon crawl item is a levitating crowbar with a rope attached. Just throw it down the corridors, LOL. Rope trick spell is important too. Yeah, it is. It is is exactly what it is. It's a collection of design essays on the philosophy of dungeons. Dungeons and RPGs are as useful today as they were in 1974, and though our options for encounter areas have moved beyond medieval underground structures to include almost any environment you can think of, these areas are still successful almost exactly to the extent in which they provide limitation and structure, focusing play and emphasizing some choices over another. We've gotten pretty abstract here, so let's get to the fundamental concrete lesson that informs all dungeon design. A dungeon map is a flowchart, providing both structure in both space and time, and keeping play choices within clearly defined limitations. This is not a new observation. It's obvious to anyone who has thought even casually about dungeon design. But the dungeon or level designer who forgets it or believes they can ignore or throw away the flowchart is mistaken, as their storytelling environment will suffer as the result. And we talked about if you're doing like theater of the mind or narrative dungeons, the flowchart may be all that you need. Looks like on my side, everything's fine, John. I don't see that it's telling me I got a weird connection or anything. So, in a successful role-playing game, anything can happen within clearly defined boundaries. Whether these boundaries are physical, in the classic dungeon, or conceptual, as in social RPGs, players are happiest when they know where they are and what rules apply there, because then, of course, they can look for ways to break them. So that poll 1, that was that boundaries. Okay, so a bounded environment. Poll 2 is theme. Dungeon structure keeps players' choices within boundaries, but what keeps players moving forward are goals. This may seem obvious, but there are nuances here that make this idea deceptively complex. Though you can go into a dungeon to just slaughter and loot, as in Dave Megary's classic board game Dungeon, that gets old pretty fast. A proper dungeon is built around an overriding goal that's made clear to the players up front. Destroy the wicked archmage, rescue the missing heir, replace the stolen sacred idol. This focuses player decision-making by giving them a compass for their choices, pointing toward those options that appear to lead toward their goal. But a goal provides more than just a compass for making choices. It also provides a theme for designing the environment in which those choices are made. The goal needs a dramatic context, a situation and backstory that gives it meaning and significance. In short, your dungeon needs a theme, and every encounter and circumstance within the dungeon should reinforce that theme. This helps greatly with your design because once you have your theme, environment, and encounter ideas that support it come easily and tend to link together, giving your dungeon theatrical cohesiveness. It also helps the players because once they see the theme of the place matches their overarching goal, they instinctively know what choices they will move them toward that goal. And every one of those choices will feel satisfying and dramatically correct. Do note, however, that the order of polls 1 and 2 could be reversed. You can decide your dungeon's theme first and then derive the goal from that context. So pick your dungeon's theme, and if possible, write out a single sentence for clarity. Then as you design each part of your dungeon, ask yourself how it matches the theme and advances it. Do that consistently, and it will draw your players through the space, creating a plausible and convincing story as you go. Okay, well, let's see. We've got this other poll here, pacing, mechanics, vistas. Okay, well, what other topics are we covering here? We want to see what Zeb Cook has to say. Let's at least examine what Zeb has to say. Maybe a good thing to do would be go through just a few paragraphs of each one and see what really grabs our attention. The first one was some rather basic dungeon information. David Zeb Cook has been a writer and professional game designer for 43 years, working in video and tabletop games. Most notably, he was the designer of TSR's AD&D Second Edition rule set, the D&D Expert Rules, and Oriental Adventures rulebook, and the Planescape campaign setting. Planescape is on the list to look at as well. Do a deep dive into, like we did with Dark Sun. I got a box set of Planescape stuff sitting over there, but I realized later that it's not like the intro box or something like that. So we'll just have to see. In video games, he was the designer on Fallout 2, the lead designer of the City of Villains MMO, and recently a zone content leader for the Elder Scrolls Online game. He has written novels and short stories, including Soldiers of Ice, King Pinch, and Horse Lords. Although technically retired, Zeb still can't resist the lure of game and adventure design. Okay, so more than just a hole in the ground. Hey, Charlie. Welcome, Charlie. Good to see you. Sable Phoenix says, I'm designing a dungeon that's a floating wizard's tower that teleported over a lake and then crashed, tipping partway over so that everything is at an angle and bottom floors are flooded. Well, that sounds cool. City of Villains had some great writing in it. So more than just a hole in the ground. By David Zeb Cook. Dungeons everywhere. Since the early days of RPGs, dungeons, ranging from simple complexes to vast multi-layered labyrinths, have been a staple of fantasy campaigns. Landscapes were littered with them, and every barony worth its salt had at least one of these tourist traps for doughty adventurers. The dungeon filled with monsters and abandoned treasure has become a trope supported by a string of B-movies, fantasy novels, and published adventures. Dungeons everywhere. Except in the real world. Despite thousands of years of history, the real world is not littered with dungeons. In fact, they are quite rare. In this, the real world and the world of imagination are seriously out of alignment. Is this a problem? Of course not. In fact, reality is full of useful material for any useful campaign. It's just a matter of knowing where to look for it. What is gained by looking in the real world when it does not want dungeons? The first is grounding. Things in the real world exist for reasons. While those reasons may be antiquated or forgotten in the modern world, they provide meaning and lore. A castle on the Thames does not have the same weight of substance as the Tower of London. The first is just a vague place. The other has murderers, executions, intrigue, ghosts, superstitions, pomp, and splendor. The second is theft. Steal from history to save work and time. Need to work up a new location for next week's adventure, but your boss has saddled you with a killer deadline? A little time on the internet investigating real places can provide maps, photographs, descriptions, even useful legends and ghost stories for ideas. The biggest trick is knowing what to look for. Prisoners or cheese? Yeah, Sable Phoenix says reality would be a better place with more dungeons. I came up with a heuristic to provide my nephews with. And whenever we're talking about something that, they're younger, and the younger will be like, oh, whoa, is that real? Is that real? Like if you're talking about something, I don't know, some story or something like that, or like Cthulhu or something. I was like, no, the heuristic is, does it sound fun and neat, and would it make the world a more exciting place? Okay, well, then it doesn't exist. We should start a dungeon Kickstarter and try to make one. Then the world would be better. Dungeons like those found in movies and fantasy novels, massive underground complexes with spaces for torture and imprisonment, are rarer than hen's teeth in the real world. Building castles meant digging a big pit for the foundation for walls and towers. Rather than fill a perfectly good pit with a bunch of cells, the space inside the tower foundations would be used for things like storerooms, cisterns, cesspits, wells, even tunnels that led outside the walls. Cells and torture chambers were generally not part of the plan. Storage space was more important than cells, especially since influential prisoners could be locked in towers while the less important ones were put in storerooms, locked in cages, chained to stakes outside, or put wherever was convenient until their punishment could be administered. For a fantasy campaign, the good news is that every baron worth his salt should have at least a fortified tower, if not a proper full castle, leaving the countryside dotted with structures old and new. Under each of these is likely a small collection of chambers, which, while not spectacular, are worthwhile places to explore. Occupied castles might have an armory, treasure, arcane workshop, a valuable hostage, a lone mad prisoner, or even a problematic pet dungeon. Abandoned and ruined castles could even become a monster's den, a pious monk's hermitage, shelter from runaway peons, a bandit stronghold, a home of a shunned hedge wizard, a sinister cult's altar, a cache of a smuggling gang, a necromancer's ossuary, or even a portal to a dangerous place. For lore, such ruins beg the question of who lived there and what happened to them. Were they loved by the peasants, or were they cruel landlords? Did orcs overrun their manor and wipe them out in the last invasion? What is the tragic tale of their downfall? A cell with a view. Dungeons in the real world were often found above ground than under it. Throughout medieval times, noblemen and women were more often imprisoned in castles, where they sometimes wined and dined visitors or even their jailers. Prisoners in the Tower of London were kept, obviously, in the Tower. When Ranulph Flambard escaped the Tower of London in 1101, he used rope to scale down the walls, as did several other later escapees. A few others made their getaways by casually walking out the front gate. In 1916, an imprisoned subaltern walked out, had dinner, and then came back, apparently concerned that his absence had caused a ruckus. The original Newgate prison, built in the early 1200s, was a wooden building with an adjacent gate tower. The conditions were certainly vile, but the building became so run down that there were several mass escapes before it could eventually be declared unfit and rebuilt in 1436. The rebuilding provided cells with chimneys and privies, comfortable rooms in the gatehouse, a chapel, recreation rooms, and a dining hall, but also included dank basement cells and lightless strongholds for the truly unfortunate. This is not quite the image of the Hollywood dungeon. Still, it has a share of pain and suffering. Throughout its time, officials were accused of pocketing payments for prison repairs, while some sheriffs routinely tortured prisoners to extort money or accept bribes to save condemned men from the gallows, and then seeing them hanged anyway. Certainly, it was not a place of comfort, but it wasn't a proper dungeon either. So, what other topics we got here? Or not? Secrets beneath the streets. Neighborhood connections. Quiet as a grave. Plumbing. Fresh and foul. Oh, lost cities? I wonder what it has to say about that. Zero the Blade says, using real-world ruins are always a good way to learn basic dungeon design. But as Sable Phoenix points out, a problem with real-world ruins is they tend to be ruined. They're usually impossible to get into after a point of everything that collapses. Making reality worse since the beginning of time. Thor says, early 20th century prisons were very polite. So let's take a look at this lost city idea here. Lost cities, is there historical analog for underground cities popular in some fantasies? Yes, there are multiple examples, of which Darren Q in Turkey is the most famous. Carved out of soft rock in ancient times, it was a series of chambers and tunnels up to 80 meters deep in some places that could house up to 20,000 people. It had stables, storerooms, wine presses, and chapels in addition to simple housing. Fresh air and some sunlight entered through central shafts. It's connected to Kamakia, another cave city, by a 9-kilometer tunnel. All told, there are 200 or more underground villages and settlements in the region. Similar cave complexes were built in China. One of the best known is the Guayaju Caves. Carved on the side of a cliff, it has a 350 rooms spread across multiple levels. Another is the shrine complex of the Magician Grottos in Gansu province. It consists of 191 cave shrines carved into the side of a rock tor where monks lived and received pilgrims who came to visit the shrines. Elsewhere in the world are some settlements carved into stone. The most famous is Petra in Jordan with its elaborate architecture. Iran, I would love to go see that. Iran boasts the ancient Persian underground city of Nushabad with 3 different levels, 20 to 60 meters underground. In Georgia, the remote monastery city of Vardizia is claimed to once have had 6,000 rooms built in 13 layers up the mountainside. The Bandigara escarpment in Mali includes cliff tombs and villages built under the overhangs of the giant rock wall. In most cases, the inspiration to dig underground cities wasn't architectural, it was fear. Underground cities made good fortresses and shelters against invading armies. Even in the most modern age, tunnels were dug for barracks and storerooms. Even in the modern age. Fearful of Napoleon in the 1800s, the English dug military tunnels under Dover Castle. Before World War II, the French created the massive but ultimately futile underground fortress of the Maginot Line, and elsewhere in the Rockies, the Cheyenne Mountain NORAD base still exists. In a fantasy campaign, who knows what underground strongholds fearful people of paranoid kings might create. So then he concludes, as these few examples have shown, the real world is filled with ideas and inspiration to make dungeons much, much more than simple holes in the ground. The location mentioned here and others can easily be converted into game settings as is, or picked apart and reassembled in a best way that suits the campaign. Furthermore, these magic rabbit holes on the internet. Further, through the magic rabbit hole of the internet, it is simple and entertaining to find stunning visuals, wonderful architecture, strange facts of histories, weird legends and folklore, and even useful maps to bring these settings to life. History is a strong ally in bringing any campaign to life. A dungeon is a story. Well, we do talk a lot about story structure here on this channel, like on the Table Talk. So that could be interesting to look at. No Empty Rooms by James L. Sutter. Let's see about that one. Good morning, Draco. James says Tibetan mountaintop settlements are often carved into the rock, too. Like a sky dungeon. So, No Empty Rooms by James L. Sutter. Let's find out who this is. James L. Sutter is co-creator of the Path. Oh, okay. I suppose we should know this. James L. Sutter is a co-creator of the Pathfinder and Starfinder role-playing games. And also, by the way, I was thinking we need to look more at Pathfinder. I was expecting to go into Pathfinder in more detail because I still want to learn more about it. The second edition Pathfinder. But we've kind of gone all retro lately, and I've got some other things to do and talk about there. But we should get back to Pathfinder because I do want to talk more about. We need to just get into the Pathfinder Second Edition Player's Handbook because we went through the starter box, but then also we were told that the Game Master's Handbook, which I do have over there, the game. Oh, look, no, see, there's plenty. I was told the game mastery guide was great, so I've got that. And then also there is also the advanced player's guide. So we do need to talk more about Pathfinder. So James L. Sutter is the co-creator of the Pathfinder and Starfinder role-playing games and served as both the first creative director for Starfinder and the executive editor of the Pathfinder Tales novel online. He is the author of the fantasy novels Death's Heretic, a finalist for the Compton Crook Award for Best First Novel, The Redemption Engine, which won the 2015 Scribe Award for Best Original Speculative Novel. He published short stories in such venues as Nightmare, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and the #1 bestseller Machine of Death, as well as essays in Clark's World and Lightspeed. Queers Destroy Science Fiction. In addition, he's written comics, a wealth of tabletop gaming material and video games, and most recently the Starfinder Alexa game, featuring Nathan Fillion and Laura Bailey. For more information on his work, plus world-building classes and writing advice, find him online at jameslsutter.com or on Twitter at JamesLSutter. Okay. So, Dungeon is a story. So, you never forget your first dungeon map. I was 10 years old, wedged up against the pebbled vinyl of a school bus seat, flipping through the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons rulebook I'd borrowed from a teacher. There in the back was what I still think of as a crossword map, a classic gridded white polygonal rooms against a black background. I was instantly captivated, poring over each new chamber and imagining what strange wonders it might contain. What stood in those alcoves? Where did the staircase lead? What might be carved on the circular pillars? What role-playing maps have evolved? While role-playing maps have evolved greatly since then in both artistry and the technology facilitating their creation, it still only takes a few lines on graph paper to bring me back to the sense of awe and curiosity. Whether full color in a source book or scrolled on the back of your math homework, dungeon maps are simultaneously mysterious and accessible, daring you to fill in the missing details. That's the timeless potential of a dungeon map. At the same time, however, a map alone is not an adventure. It's easy for dungeon crawling to go wrong. So many times I've gotten excited about a fascinating map full of creative room shapes and intriguing details, only to find the actual adventure leaves those rooms tragically bland. A complex of mysterious caverns or corridors is left half empty, or filled with wave after wave of identical enemies, leaving bored players to grind their way through. So how do you make sure a dungeon crawl lives up to its potential? No empty rooms. It all comes down to 3 words. No empty rooms. That doesn't mean you need to fight in every room. In fact, it's important that you don't have one. When players know there's always a fight behind the next door, it ruins the suspense. It can lead to small dungeons and boring maps. If your game system has players leveling up after a set number of encounters, you might only be able to afford a few rooms in your encounter budget or have to deal with players leveling up at inconvenient times. And if you're writing adventures for potential publication, a stream of encounters and stat blocks can quickly eat up your available word count. So, at word count is something I am definitely dealing with. I was trying to do 10,000 words at plus 10,000 words of lore, then 2,500 words of stats for the Tales of Rabavania World Primer, and now somehow I've ended up with 16,000 words. I don't know how that happened. So we're gonna have to do some editing. So word count you can definitely eat up. Crossword map, love that comparison. Zero Theory says. Vision says, I'm still running the beginner box. This is referring to Pathfinder, I'm sure. My players and I are taking slow, learning as we go. We are having a blast. Fantastic. I am glad to hear it. So then what do I mean by no empty rooms? I mean that rooms should never be left blank. A one-line description that says merely this is a bedroom or this cell is empty is a missed opportunity and leaves players feeling unrewarded for having mustered up the bravery to open that door. In my experience as a game master, there's nothing worse than seeing players' faces fall at a flavorless room description, which inevitably leaves me trying to jazz things up on the fly. But why force GMs to improvise? Instead, make sure there's always something that sets an otherwise empty room apart for those around it. Give your players a reason to be interested, even if it's just a sentence or two. Some ideas include decoration. Aesthetic details can make a room stand out in player memories, even if they don't have significant effect on the adventure. Perhaps the bedroom contains several pneumatic tubes for sending messages elsewhere in the dungeon, or a bathtub fed by a magical spigot in the shape of a dragon. Or the nature of the room itself might be interesting, such as the area where your subterranean dungeon links up with a forgotten temple complex, or a room that's been carved out of a giant tree root. These dungeons can also offer easy role-playing opportunities. Perhaps that pneumatic tube network lets your players communicate with monsters in other parts of the dungeon, or maybe that bathtub dragon can animate to relate juicy gossip. Why settle for an empty corridor when you can have a roll of phoenix heads whispering embarrassing memories from the character's childhood? Clues. Setting details can also reward perceptive characters by warning them of what they might face ahead, such as a bugbear hair on a bed or a telltale marks of a body being dragged. What's more, something like a half-completed mural might give you a chance to introduce additional world lore and backstory in a way that feels rather earned rather than expository. Clues can hint at sub-stories or side quests, sub-stories, or side quests, such as tension between the dungeon's residents. This can be fun even if they aren't load-bearing for the current adventure. A page torn from a journal or a cameo locket with a face scratched off might mean nothing now, but can act as an adventure hook or foreshadowing for future adventures. Whether it's a partial map, they got to remember that, though. We're talking about things that are significant. Like, if that's significant, they got to remember that. Your players do. Whether it's a partial map, a tattered banner, cryptic graffiti, or a smashed magical device, these elements suggest a larger world to your players and give you, as the GM, both inspiration for future adventure and the chance to look like an all-knowing mastermind when you find an opportunity to tie something back years later. If they remember. Sable Phoenix says, that's a huge problem with 5e, in my opinion. Forcing GMs to improvise is de rigueur in the design of stuff that comes out of WotC anymore. GMs are going to have to improvise enough without adventure and setting designers relying on that to make things work. Give the GM a bunch of solid hooks to hang that improvised tapestry on. I like it. Let's see. Okay, let's look at these two passages. Menagerie dungeons. Menagerie dungeon is my term for a classic first edition style romp where inhabitants seem plucked at random from a bestiary. For as long as there have been role-playing games, there have been people making fun of menagerie dungeons. How do these folks ask, could there possibly be minotaurs in one room, devils in the next, an owlbear in the hall between, and why hasn't the dragon next door eaten them all? Yet these questions aren't reason to jettison the menagerie. You just need to answer them. The easiest question is that the creatures are there because someone put them there. Whoever created the dungeon bound them as guardians or gathered them for a ritual. Maybe they're intended as war beasts for gladiatorial games, attractions in a private zoo, or research specimens for a college of spellcasters. Yet they could also have arrived on their own, drawn by the power of an artifact, fallen through portals from other planes, or driven together by habitat destruction. By coming up with an explanation, no matter how basic, you give yourself the freedom to play with your favorite beasts. Okay. Maybe we just skip on through that then. Make it memorable. Okay, emotional. How much time we got left? Let's go down. Let's see. What did Wolfgang have to say? Sound the alarm. Character noise and dungeon consequences. That's probably a good one. By Christopher M. Servico. It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, but probably something has been disturbed that would have been better left quiet. That's probably a good essay. Let's see. Red alert. If a party noise occurs, it seems implausible there would be no resulting consequences. One simple but effective way to let the consequence play out is to keep track of the dungeon's overall alert level. This measurement might be a simple 3-tiered system: red alert, yellow alert, and all clear. But it can be as complex and multi-tiered as the GM wishes. Every time the party makes noise or fails to mitigate an escalating factor, like the above-mentioned guard running to bring help, the overall alert level can increase. With each such increase, the dungeon could become a more dangerous environment. That increased danger might result in more frequent random encounter rolls, or the need to make such a roll every time the party enters a new dungeon or dungeon area. It might cause doors that are otherwise usually open or unlocked to be shut, locked, or barricaded as the dungeon denizens take defensive steps. Magical countermeasures, where applicable, a legendary monster's lair, action, or regional effects might begin to manifest with greater frequency. Crucially, however, the player should likewise have opportunities to decrease the alert level through their actions, preventing a foe from running off for reinforcements, successfully hiding from a period of time, cleaning up evidence of their earlier skirmishes, successfully bluffing a guard, crafting an illusion, or otherwise misleading investigating creatures to provide an alternative, benign explanation for some ruckus they made. Where appropriate, the GM should require skill checks relevant to the action taken. Yeah, that's why, fighting room by room, often that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if they know they're under attack, you're going to end up fighting everyone in some type of bottleneck right there. That would seem to make sense. What does Wolfgang have to say? Where is his essay? I'd be interested to know what Bashir has to say. What was this on? His is on the question on questionable naps. I guess that's like resting in the middle of the dungeon. The rule of 3, crafting dungeons that focus on mood, narrative, or agency. Where are you going to run to? Okay, beyond the stairs. Let's take a look at this one here for about the last 10 minutes here. Making Your Dungeon Vertical by Wolfgang Bauer. We tend to think of our world and our game worlds primarily in the straightforward two-dimensional terms. Our maps and mental images of roadways and cities are flat. Our board games are commonly a single board, a battle map, or even a sheet of paper. It works for the way we think and move in space. However, making the effort to turn a flat vertical sheet dungeon into something more innovative and multi-dimensional can add hugely to your enjoyment of any tabletop RPG, especially heroic games of thrilling adventure. Here's how. Layer cake dungeons. For Dungeons & Dragons, vertical design goes back to the 1970s and to the invention of layered dungeons, where depths indicates difficulty or danger. Professional dungeons are still created this way and published to great acclaim because the formula works. Some well-known examples of the layer cake dungeon are the Ruins of Undermountain by Ed Greenwood, the Dragon Mountain by Paul Arden Lieberg and Colin McComb. More recent examples include the 5e Undermountain adventure Waterdeep, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, the Rapin Athuk Mega Dungeon by Bill Webb and Clark Peterson, Necromancer Games, and Scarlet Citadel by Steve Winter. Each has multiple layers loosely connected, and Scarlet Citadel includes the classic cutaway side view as part of the package, stacked from top to bottom. What these adventures have in common is something somewhat limited vertical options. The Undermountain levels are connected by stairs and a vertical shaft. Dragon Mountain contains a huge labyrinth of dungeon halls. The Rapathan Athuk levels can be bypassed by a shortcut, and the Scarlet Citadel connects some areas with an underground river. In each case, the usual style of adventuring is to address each level separately and then go down a layer to the next, more challenging one. We talked about this when we were talking about Jacquessing a dungeon, right? Multiple ways to get down and possibly bypass other levels. But going in a more structured way, this provides a clean progression of difficulty for the players to explore at the cost of some linearity, a familiar trade-off with many adventure designs. And it means that each level is, fortunately, easy to map on a sheet of paper. Well, that's also over here on the list. Veins of Earth is coming up again. So Lamentations, that's still on the short list. Natural cave systems. In contrast to layer cake dungeons, caves, caverns, and natural underground formations are more irregular and often more challenging in their vertical elements. Chasms, stalactites, ledges, and uneven floors make for interesting tactical options in combat that are not present in rooms carved from stone. We can see this kind of adventure design again and again, such as the introduction of the Underdark, so richly presented in The Vault of the Drow by Gary Gygax, and continuing to the present day with Rise of the Drow, the vast subterranean empire of the ghouls, and the Kobold underground cliff city of Lilifor. All these pale in comparison to the deepest cavern known in the real world, which is Variovkina Cave at 7,257 feet deep in the western Caucasus region of Abkhazia, Georgia. Roughly 1,500 feet deeper than the Grand Canyon, it has required many expeditions to explore since its discovery in 1968, but is a perfect example of a site that could use vertical difficulty to enforce game design goals. In a layer cake design, the element limiting characters from going straight to the bottom is finding the stairs or passage down to the next level. Cavern systems are not often limited that way because of the gnarly nature of connecting passages. Instead, they are limited by the ability of the characters to move around a difficult cavern space. In particular, actually, somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody brought up on one of the cavern or dungeon design comments on a replay that saying that everybody should go on a spelunking expedition if they're trying to design a dungeon, not just a tourist cave, but even just a basic level spelunking. I've never done that. Sounds like fun though. We've got, I drive by DeSoto Caverns when I'm going over to like family Christmases and things, or just family get-togethers, because it tends to be in that direction. And of course, that's a commercial tourist cave. But I've never been in there, and I drive by it, and I need to go. I need to just go. In layer cake design, the elements limiting characters from going straight to the bottom is finding the stairs, or we said that. In particular, low-level characters have ropes and climbing skills, but not flight, shape-shifting, or teleportation. So getting to the bottom of a deep cavern can be limiting by the ability to bring enough rope to fly down or to pass through a very, very narrow space, such as simply by finding the passage down. By the time the party discovers the deepest layers of cavernous Underdark, they have the tools needed to explore a 1,000-foot pit or a cavern of shifting animated stalactites, even if there are no convenient stairs into the fathomless abyss. 33 vertical elements to add to your dungeon. The vertical axis is sometimes less obvious when designing on a sheet of paper, so to create vertical dungeons easier, here's a list that should provide ways to improve climbing, flying, and vertical movement in your own dungeons. Adding one or two of these elements to any room in a dungeon will immediately increase the value of flight, climbing, ranged weapons, and similar options, and it will decrease the sense that every room is a straightforward melee. In the best cases of original design, you'll create story possibilities and tactical options by making the players think about how and when to go vertical. 1. Abyss, classic bottomless pit, air shaft, balconies, beams, bridges, catapults or engines. A catapult could be used to hurl goblins, skeletons, or other foes up or down in a party, or could be used by a clever acrobatic halfling to move around between areas. Cavern chimney, cliff, elevators, mechanical, elevators, magical, floating platforms. With a permanent levitate spell, any flat surface can become a flying platform subject to magical commands or maneuvered by the use of controlling circlet, wand, or other item. Handholds, ladders, ledges, mineshaft, moonbeams, or radiant stairs. Mushrooms. Any underground plant will do, but a tree-sized or house-sized mushroom provides the possibility of stairs inside it leading up to the rooftop locale, especially interesting in a cavern with a mushroom forest. Open pit or quarry. Pillars, pipes, pit, platform, ramps, ropes, stepwell, stairs, switchbacks. Teleporter portal. We were talking about teleportation last time, weren't we? When a portal need not shift someone vertically, it is certainly entertaining when it does, especially to some precarious upper end or some crowded or dangerous lower destination. Tower, vines, webs, well. Encouraging vertical movement. Once you've added vertical elements to your dungeon design, the issue is figuring out how to encourage your players to use them. The easiest way to do this is for monsters, villains, and NPCs to use those elements to their own advantage, being ambushed from above or being dropped into the chasm. Teach players to consider their options carefully. If you've tried the monsters are doing it method and want to further encourage players, be sure to mention your 3D elements when such locations offer valuable sight lines, tactical advantages, visible treasures, or the only route to a dungeon deeper still. You gain a bonus to ranged attacks from a balcony is a straightforward idea, as is there are some barrels stacked at the top of this ramp. If the players don't bite right away, keep up vertical element suggestions regardless. Characters with ranged attacks will appreciate it, and characters without climbing or flying options may value them more highly. By the time player characters in your game start poking at air shafts and investigating pillars for climbing, you'll know you've successfully added another dimension to your dungeons in more ways than one. Dungeons by design. The living dungeon, that's probably good. All right. Well, that concludes our brief kind of sit down and take a look at the Kobold Guide to Dungeons. Charlie says, been starting to dabble in hand-drawing dungeons. This is fantastic. Well, it might be one to pick up then. David says, catapults remind me of gnomes and Mount Nevermind of Dragonlands. Yeah, I know. It makes me want to go look that one up. I think I've heard about it, but more to do. All right. Well, that was a good dive, I think. That was a good dive. So that covers actually dungeon design from a number of different levels. This was much more theoretical and sort of the philosophy of dungeon design, whereas the cyclical dungeons, if you're interested in dungeon design, I would also check out our episode on cyclical dungeons and also on Jackweighing or Jackwissing a dungeon, because those were also much, I think, crunchier in the idea about how to structure dungeon and how to evaluate dungeons, whether or not they are good or not. So there's been, that's been a pretty good series, I think, on dungeon design here that we have done on the Morning Grind. I don't think I have any other book that's necessarily on dungeon design that's at least on the short list over here. So, spelunking to help drive-in design is a great idea. Anything, to help, I bet that's dungeon design is a great idea. Anything memorable about the trip will paint the walls of your imagination and make affecting more cohesive you are designing and ad-libbing. Yes. Okay. All right. So tonight we'll be live again, 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Brianna and I will be talking with Cameron Pasha about the story structure of The Fall and as an archetypical story in our world. So we'll be doing that tonight. I look forward to seeing everybody. And hey, don't forget to check out ravenkeep.net if you would like to get one of our one of the mugs, either the Cultist Coffee or the Witch's Brew with the logo that's a takeoff of the Starbucks logo. I'm very proud of them. And if you would like a discount code for them, channel members, check out the community tab and you will see the discount code for them on the community tab for a members only post. All right. I will see everybody tonight. Good being here with you today. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation. Have a great day, a productive day.